Okay, I would like to call the Community Infrastructure Service Committee to order, please. Do we have a mover on the consent items? Mayor Zaire. Any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's fine. Thanks.
You're fine? Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I wanted to know if I wanted to know who uses those spots in front of that. Is it a nursing home? And I just, along with that, I wondered if what we're putting in as no parking can be less restrictive. It seems that we want to keep the two driveways open, but it seems that we're blocking off more than perhaps we need to.
I can't see. Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, through the chair. In response, in dealing with the request came from a resident of one of the villages. There's a long-term seniors care village and just a typical seniors village in this area. The suspicion is that it might be some employee parking of the resident village because of the convenience to park out front instead of going out back. So we'll be dealing and following up directly with the retirement village. But specifically, we're just prohibiting parking 10 meters either side of the driveway to open up the sight lines to make it safer coming in and out. Now, at the same time, we have some bus stops in those near areas, so they might be a little longer than 10 meters beyond the driveway, but it's also to keep the bus stops clear as well.
Okay, I was just looking at and it seemed that your black dots were going back quite a ways beyond both sides of the driveway, and it was, my concern was that if it's people coming to visit people, you know, that we're making it tougher for them. So if that's not the case, that's fine.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair to say that not to scale should have been probably added to this plan.
No, that's a good idea. The other point I was hoping that you could add is the little icon showing north, south, east, and west.
Yes, we'll do that.
Just a little thing, but like you talked about west.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are all the questions on the consent items. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Up next is we'll be dealing with discussion items number 3, subdivision agreement report. And Julianne, you want to give us a presentation, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present to you the report which outlines the updates to the City's Standard Subdivision Agreement. The Standard Subdivision Agreement has been in use for approximately the last 12 years without any major changes and has been working really well for the City of Kitchener. However, since it has been implemented, the City has developed some new standards, such as the City's Development Manual, and staff, due to their daily use of the agreement, have identified areas that require a slight refresh. There are no substantive changes proposed to the document. The City divisions, as well as the development industry and the City's legal department, were consulted about the proposed updates, and they all had an opportunity to provide some input into the revised document. The updates proposed are largely administrative in nature and will reflect current terminology or new standards. For instance, the revised and current terminology will include things such as new and current department names and titles. In addition, we will be incorporating commonly used special conditions that were not originally part of the Standard Subdivision Agreement, such as the urban design conditions that we have been typically adding into each subdivision agreement for priority lots, and the requirement for streetscape plans and for monitoring of infrastructure. In addition, we will be making the connection between the City's Development Manual, which was last revised in 2012, and the subdivision agreement by requiring that all of our standards are consistently applied to parks and the city's infrastructure. And the number of improvements that have been identified through the daily use of the agreement will also be incorporated, such as the requirement to advance the timing of requiring the developer to enter into a subdivision agreement from prior to servicing to now prior to grading. This was based on a recommendation that came from our staff that work with the document on a daily basis. And before I answer any questions, I do want to identify that there were two very minor changes that have been identified since the publishing of the report, and this is just due to the renumbering of the sections in the document. If I could refer you to page 313, item number 2.9, there is a reference to section 2.2. This should read 2.3. And in addition, on page 3-16, under clause number 3.7, in the third line, there should be a reference currently stating 3.6. It should be revised to state 3.4. This concludes my presentation. I'm certainly welcome any questions that you may have on the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Julianne. Councillor Vermanovich?
Thank you, and I know the report speaks to the section of community engagement, but just for the purposes of the official record, have we addressed all of the concerns that have been raised by the industry in terms of the new agreements?
Absolutely, Councillor Verbanovic. We have engaged the Home Builders Association on a number of occasions. We met as an entire group, and in addition, there was a sub-group that was formed, and both Ms. Ross and myself had met with the home builders with absolutely very positive discussion about the agreement. Everyone felt that it was already working quite well. And a lot of the suggestions were more administrative type of suggestions from the home builders as well, or editorial type of suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Yaneski?
Thank you. Very familiar report, as you probably would know, but it's interesting to note, just as an introductory comment, this is sort of a revamping of the staging subdivision agreement report roughly every 10 years or so. I remember working on it back in the 80s and 90s as well to bring it up from a 7-page document now to about a 47-page document with all the conditions that get put on, very simplified back in the olden days. Anyways, I have no concern with any of the conditions because they all seem straightforward, having gone through them all. But I do have one question that sort of puzzles me on page 3-15, clause 3.4c. And that talks to about 110% of the cost. And I'm trying to understand how you get 110%. I thought we could only get 100%. I'm missing something.
This was an amount recommended by our engineering staff and/or our community service, the operations staff, and I incorporated it in because this was a request made by them in terms of how they manage their projects. I don't understand where that came from, but that's the reason why. Yeah.
Mr. Picard?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't had a specific conversation with engineering staff on this one, but I can explain the concept of 110%, and that is something that is more and more common. And the reason for it is twofold. One is it's a contingency that allows for not only inflationary factors, but also allows for a premium should you need to call a tender and get works done in a very tight time period. So that 10% is a contingency to allow for those two possibilities.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola?
Just a couple of minor things. What was the second change you referred to?
It was on page 3.16, and it was under section 3.7. In the third line, it currently reads 3.6. It references section 3.6. It should be referencing section 3.4.
The other thing I wanted, these changes now that you've made, will the original document get changed?
Yes, that's the intention.
Like, I like to go into the link now and go to the agenda for this committee. If I go in there, will these two changes be made?
They will be made after
Right
today.
back to that?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, that's fine, that's good. The only other thing, I want to hear it again, because I couldn't see the yellow. It was, and I just wanted to know that, and you stated that there are no substantive changes.
That is correct.
Yeah, so there's no major issue.
No, that's correct.
That's fine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Those are all the questions. Does anyone wish to make any comments? Councillor Yaneski?
No, just moving it.
Oh, just moving it? Oh, sorry. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Item number 4 on the agenda is concerning the Victoria Park equipment, and we do have a delegation here to speak on that. But I think I want to go through, get staff to give their presentation on that before we hear the delegation. Mr. Hummel, go right ahead.
To you, Mr. Chair, members of committee, back in August, neighbors in Victoria Park had come to council to present concerns and issues they had with equipment in the park and coming through the park. Council directed staff to go back, meet with the neighbors, and to review issues that they have identified. In the report in front of you, we've looked at the history of the equipment in the park, what it's used for, and some of the changes we've made to date. At this point, I guess we believe we're looking for some direction from council on how we move forward or if any changes are needed.
Okay, we'll move on to our delegation, and then we'll all ask questions along with that. We have Ms. Claire. Welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes to present your material.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, councillors, everyone. Out of respect for your incredibly long meeting day, our neighborhood has decided to make only a very brief statement regarding operations report. We are here to listen to your deliberations, and then we reserve our right to further address council on October the 28th or thereafter of our continuing concerns regarding this matter. The meeting with operations on September 11th raised further concerns and questions, particularly about discrepancies in our experience and what is reported, and efficiencies. We are absolutely disappointed in this report. We find the report to be completely dismissive of the concerns and issues we raised. While we appreciate that operations has instructed staff not to make superfluous trips into the park, our experience of that instruction is that it's effective for a short period of time and then it starts happening again. And that does not address the issues and concerns that we raised. The report offers no solutions, neither incremental ones that would seem relatively easy to implement at no or little cost, nor long-term ones that resolve the issue of satellite sites and their impact in residential neighborhoods with no commercial or industrial zoning. We remind you of the strength of our petition and neighborhood support, 113 signatures, 6 declines, 2 of which were for conflict of interest reasons. I was a primary pavement pounder for the petition, and I can assure you that Victoria Park residents were continuing to be accommodating of all the noise and disruption from maintenance vehicles because they believed that this traffic was temporary, that there was going to be an end, but it didn't end. And they were unaware that these were because of permanent changes. Our common voice, for the reasons we presented in August, deems it not reasonable to locate satellite maintenance sites in residential neighborhoods. And so today we ask you to give this matter your most serious deliberation and find working solutions that are both immediate and long-term. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blair. We have a couple questions for you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I might have pushed my button too early because what I was going to ask you, have you seen any difference between the last time you were here and today? And as I listen more and more to your words, I think I know what the answer is, but go ahead.
There has been a difference because of the instruction. I think staff are not coming to park perhaps to have lunch or breaks. But that doesn't address the issues of the heavy equipment and the noise and the principle of the matter. And it doesn't address the fact that what was happening 10 or 20 years ago is not what is happening now. I mean, we all know that park use, it's outlined in the report how much there's been an increase. And so putting on top a satellite site, but no, in terms of noise, and last week there was a small sidewalk sweeper bombing up and down David Street, and why, so they're still there.
Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, and thank you for coming before council. And I can understand that obviously having to deal with the resonating noise from these vehicles, it would be somewhat of a nuisance. But something that's quite glaring is the cost of changing that model. And through the report, it outlines that if these, rather than having a satellite location for maintenance of the park and some surrounding areas, and everything had to be cordoned from the KOF, it would be additional cost of $116,000 or so. That's my understanding from the report. Do you think that's reasonable, or?
Well, I think there may be other solutions, and that's why we are disappointed, because there weren't viable solutions. In the report,
Can you address some of the, if you have some input, you have an opportunity as to what some of those solutions could be?
In the report, it says that the winter snow removal is housed in the loading bay docks of City Hall. And so my question is, and always has been, isn't there a place where these vehicles, say the sweepers, which don't have the post-use cleanup, can be stored, And so I don't see how that would necessarily be a major cost. And I believe, I have a hard name, Councillor Barry Verbonovich had said that in August that there were quite a number of places where it should be easy. And I believe Frank is going to address this issue as well. But I do have a question that came out of our meeting. At that meeting, Mr. Whitmer stated that 95% of the vehicles functioned out of COF, which leaves only 5%, okay? And so if 5% aren't housed in Victoria Park, so because there's other satellite sites as well, so say we have 1 or 2%. So if not having those vehicles, 1 or 2%, saves over $100,000, are there not other vehicles that might save those dollars as well? And then when they cite $40,000, and I know Councillor Etherington will further address this, there were other possibilities that we had talked about in our meeting, and I don't want to take away from what he's going to say, but in terms of cost, when you look at savings of $116,000 a year, and you look at between $20,000 and $40,000 one time to relocate to some place that is respectful of residential areas, that doesn't seem like a really significant cost. I mean, it's between 10 and 20 cents per resident. And I know the 10s and 20 cents add up.
And from this report and some additional points that you're raising, and we'll have opportunity, that's why this is before council. And the council has the opportunity to engage with staff as well and ask those very same questions to kind of weigh both options. Yeah, and to weigh the cost and benefit as well, because that's just as important. So
I understand that, and I think that there may be other places of inefficiencies. And one is specifically regarding garbage collection and carting all the garbage in Victoria Park back to the back of the park. And then you haul a great big noisy BSI truck twice a week or more in to haul that garbage out. And even the garbage collected by the sweepers in downtown Kitchener is hauled back there into that dumpster. Well, that's a lot of, so I think...
We'll address that to staff, and I think it would be appropriate to give them an opportunity to answer to those, and we'll ask those very questions. But I wanted to hear from you as to what some of those other suggestions that you had earlier outlined that you didn't see staff weren't as, willingness on their part to take those suggestions. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to it. So thank you.
I think there's one more economic point. The building at the back of Victoria Park that is in use is not in good repair. And I understand that it requires, for health and safety reasons, repairs. So, the question begs, why spend $20,000 setting up that when down the road, and it's been requested to be dealt with and hasn't, what kind of dollars are going to be spent there? And it just is not, it doesn't make financial sense.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll have some questions of staff after.
Okay.
Is there...
Councillor Yaneski.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. After your group appeared before us back a couple of months ago to raise this issue, I took the liberty of going out there a couple of weeks later to take a drive through and just sit around in the streets and see how many vehicles I would see go by. I didn't see any, unless I came at the wrong time of day, and it was a quiet period. So which point of the time of the day is the most busiest?
Well, when we were doing our tabulations during the summer, the early morning, when staff would drive back there and then take the equipment out.
Around 7 o'clock in the morning?
Between 6:30, 7:45, during that time for them to go back and come out. And then I know that people tabulated for a half an hour, say. Somebody did from 8:45 to 9:15, 9 to 9:30, and within that half an hour saw between 10 and 12 vehicles. I know that I was on Schneider Street several times in the morning, and within 10 minutes, there were between 8 and 10 vehicles that went by. So, and those were at different times. Dominique tabulated more over the noon hour from, say, 11 to 1:32. And I didn't tabulate, but I noted that that was increased traffic. And then, of course, at the end of the day. But last week that sweeper was bombing up and down the street how many times during the day? And that's one of the discrepancies, because in the report it says that they go out in the morning and come back in the afternoon, but that's not our experience. That there's back and forth. And so I think, I don't think that there's any intention in any way, and there is no falsification. It's just that on paper you can have a work plan. What happens in carrying out that work plan can be quite different than what happens in paper. Just like the garbage truck supposedly goes in at 7:30 in the morning, but I assure you, it goes between 6 and 6:30 and comes back out between 7 and 7:30. They say the yard isn't open, but somehow the BSI truck gets the garbage out of the dumpster back there before supposedly the gates are open. So there's those kinds of discrepancies. But it's variable, and of course, now there is less traffic, and I think that it has made a significant difference for park staff not to be going back there for breaks and lunches and that kind of thing. But that doesn't address the noisy equipment and the heavy equipment and the equipment that's used outside of Victoria Park.
Yeah, appreciate that. When I was out there to take a look at it, I also drove into the city site at the back to take a look. I hadn't been back there for a number of years, and it really hasn't changed much from what the way it looked like 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Well,
In terms of just the design, the outdoor facilities that they have, the storage of some of the vehicles, they don't have much room for expansion to put a lot of equipment in, maybe, 2 or 3 vehicles or 4, depending on the nature of them.
They did put the fenced-in area. That never used to be there. And so when that went in, that's where they stored the large mowers back there, and there's more trucks. I know park staff, in a conversation this summer, said that park equipment used to be, was stored, all of it, inside the shed.
Right.
So all the trucks, the mower, and the sweeper were all inside. There wasn't equipment outside.
There's no fence then?
Pardon?
There's no fence then, right?
Exactly, and there wasn't the extra equipment coming in.
Right.
And I think the report doesn't, I can't figure out some of the equipment. Okay, I'm not a machine person. I go by color and noise, sound, so I can identify the machines that way. So I don't know what trackless means. I know that there's an orange one and a red one and a yellow-orange one that are incredibly noisy that look like sidewalk-sized things for plowing in the winter. Maybe those are the trackless ones. But at the meeting, I also asked about the 3 machines that were hauled back there the night of the big storm. And that was the one that I saw this week, and it had a sweeper on it. But when I saw them going through the park after that storm, I don't know what exactly, I don't remember seeing sweepers on the front, so I don't know. But they didn't know what machines I meant, and I don't really see them on that list. So, and furthermore, when the park vehicles were just housed back there, there were 3 trucks, but now there's 5, however many trucks. And how many times do they go back and forth during the day?
Okay. The public meeting that you had, not public meeting, but the meeting that you had with staff on September the 11th, how many residents were there in attendance, roughly, from your group?
We didn't have that. We didn't understand that that was set up to be a public meeting. So
it was or wasn't?
The ones of us, who have been dealing with this issue attended.
Right.
So, Dominique, do you remember how many there were? There was... Yeah, at least. Yeah.
I can't hear her. I have no idea what she said.
She said about 6. I'm just trying to think off the top.
So about 6 people attended?
Yes,
half a dozen or so.
The ones who spoke, plus Lisa Harmy, and I think there was somebody else there as well who hadn't spoken.
Okay, fine. So those residents, when you met with staff on that day, at the end of the meeting or the session, you were not happy in the end with the way the
We
meeting
appreciated the meeting, but we did not feel that our concerns and issues were really taken seriously. And while we were assured that they would explore different options, the report doesn't look at how to break it down. Like, just if you broke it down and dealt with it in incremental ways, if you just take the garbage vehicles, and the sweepers that do the sidewalks downtown Kitchener, why are they housed in Victoria Park? And why is the garbage from the streets in downtown Kitchener, the sidewalks, carted back to the park, and then you have to send a truck in to take it out? Is there not a dumpster that the city has in downtown Kitchener? And couldn't the garbage in Victoria Park, which is largely in the clock tower field and along the trail, couldn't there be a dumpster someplace else so that it isn't all hauled back there and everything has to funnel through the cul-de-sac of the neighborhood? That doesn't seem like economic efficiency, and it doesn't seem like logistical efficiency. So it's just like if you break it down into pieces, so that's the garbage issue. Then you deal with the sweeper issue, and you can find a place for the sweepers. So that's why we're so disappointed. There's no immediate solution, and there's no long-term vision, because that building back there is in a state of disrepair.
Okay.
And what's going to happen in the future? And and the use of the park is expanding. All these issues are increasing.
Okay, appreciate your answer. You said you had a petition that you went around and got 100 and some odd names, households. And if it's such a still concern, where are these residents right now? Just the two of you here.
Well, number one, it's a working day, and so most people are at work. And two, people came to council. We didn't set out an invitation to come today because it didn't seem that necessary. Like, this seemed different.
Okay, thank you.
No, Ms. Claire, there's still some more questions for you. Sorry. No worries. Mayor Zaire.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here and your comments. And just like to follow up on what Councillor Singh was asking. It's certainly not your responsibility to come up with the solutions. So that's what I'm saying. But I wanted to make sure that you have put forward all of the thoughts that you have actually put into this in terms of solutions. That's the first question.
I think that probably we might have some more ideas presented at council next week.
Is there any reason why you can't do them now? Because normally we would be dealing with these at committee. That's where most of the discussion would occur.
I guess when we met after that meeting, we weren't aware until at the end of this week that we could actually speak here today. So
well,
that's
the normal
part.
Practice. All committees.
So that's part of the issue. So I'm talking only from conversation, and I know that we were hoping to speak. So I think in terms of the financial aspect, I've raised some issues. Dominique, can you think of others? Sure, if you have. Is it okay if she?
Sure.
I think the inefficiencies in terms of garbage, I think the inefficiencies of there's more sidewalk space downtown than there is in Victoria Park in terms of the trails. So I don't think it's very efficient. And given that that building apparently has health and safety issues, it doesn't seem economical to be developing that site and having chosen it in the first place. Do you have any other economic?
Before you speak some of your comments, can you just please state your name for the records?
I forgot to do that.
My name is Dominique Whalen, and I'm a resident at 51 Schneider in Victoria Park.
Thank you. You may go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if I have anything really substantive to answer your question. I think that at the meeting that happened in September, the expectation was, because the primary individuals attending were those who had presented at council before, to have a little more of a exploration of options. I think it turned into an overview of the various facts and issues. There were a few questions asked as to the kind of vehicles and the discussion back and forth. I mean, there obviously is concerns for the residents, and that was made clear by staff that they were aware that there were concerns. And at the same time, they had the fiscal responsibility of ensuring that their budgets are managed and not coming forth with solutions that were greater. So I think at that meeting we had asked, are there other areas around town, such as the old maintenance or storage area on Bram Street, that might be used that wouldn't require a lot of development, because the costs that were identified in the report as being associated with developing a new area would be a gravel bed. I think there was, again, I'm trying to remember, a gravel bed, fence, fuel, a place, I think it was fuel bunker, access to water, etc. So there was some infrastructure that had to be developed. And I guess our comment was, does it necessarily have to be developed from scratch? Can it not be piggybacked? Or are there any other areas in town that might have some excess capacity? Understanding that they're most probably all profit centers and there would be a fee attached to that. One of them that came up was the yard where Kitchener-Wilmot Hydro is located. It's a very large yard. It's close to the park. Is this not an option? And that was raised at that meeting in September, and the response was, well, we're all profit centers. There's a cost associated with all solutions. And I think our comment that Leslie made was that with the report, it was our hope, and this report was distributed to all of the individuals who had shown interest before, and there were quite a number of them. Our hope was that a number of options would be identified. Staff said their responsibility is to look at the cost and come forth with proposals, and that ultimately the fiscal decision, they might recommend, but the fiscal decision would be at council. So the area of Kitchener-Wilmot Hydro, potential at Brom Street, there are other satellite areas. I mean, the comment in the report was basically, there really isn't any other option. This is the best place, and if we moved it, it would go to another neighborhood. So we'd have another bunch of unhappy people saying they've got a satellite in their area. And not that we think that we're really special, that our neighborhood deserves any more, consideration than others. There might be other neighborhoods where residents are less impacted, given that there's only one way in and out of Victoria Park. So that kind of answers your question. We don't know. It sounded like the ins and outs of profit centers, excess capacity. I mean, it would take a lot of, I would think, insider knowledge to be able to explore what the viable options were, but there really weren't any in this report, and that was the thing that we were most disappointed. There were no options that were presented apart from building from scratch.
Okay.
And the status quo. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that.
I'm not sure I answered much more, but...
No, that's fine. The second question I have is just sort of fundamental then to the entire issue. And so the ask from you is, I assume, is fewer pieces of equipment that are there and fewer vehicles going by. You are not asking for there to be a total ban on vehicles. Is that correct?
What the consensus from the petition was that that our opinion is that vehicles that are used only in Victoria Park should be housed in Victoria Park. That makes sense. But any vehicles that are used outside of the park, as well as inside the park, should be housed outside of the park. And one of the issues that came up in the meeting was Tim Wolf's comment that horticultural sites for management and maintenance have mushroomed in the last 5 years. So you have a mushroom of staff and equipment, etc. So all of that now is drifting into the park, and but fundamentally, if it's used only in the park, fine. But if it's used outside the park, please, can you find a place elsewhere?
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just through you, I had some questions, comments, and then possibly a motion for council. I did want to point out to Councillor Yanetsky that at that meeting, those people were representative of the people who signed the petition. It was not meant as a full public meeting, at least not to my knowledge. And also the Neighbourhood Association has been involved in this issue, and they, of course, represent the entire neighbourhood. They were at that meeting. So just to move on for a few questions. Question to Dominique. How long have you lived on Schneider, Dominique? Sorry.
Our apologies. I think we thought that the questions were over and the thank you meant you could go. So here we are back again. I have lived at 51 Schneider for the last 14 years.
Okay, and would you, just to get to the nub of this, would you be content, well, content's not the right word, but would you be happier if the number of vehicles was reduced to what it was before Bram Street was closed?
That's a very I suppose I shouldn't say very interesting question because it really doesn't say very much. I think my perception of the impact before and after when Brom Street was closed is muddied by the fact that there's been substantial work in and around the park for the last many years. So I would say which ones were specific. I mean, my understanding, and I think I'm not really different from most people, it's in the whole whiff and what's in it for me. So when I sit on my street and I note 180 or 90 vehicles going by in a day, because even though I'm a porch sitter, I'm self-employed and I work on my front porch, I notice it distinctly when I can or cannot get on the phone. So part of it is the vehicles that were going up and down in front of me specifically, because it's all what's in front of my own nose, is those that went up and down Schneider Street. I think that individuals are saying, well, it makes sense to store vehicles in the park, but do they have to necessarily go up and down the residential streets because of their noise? I couldn't tell you which specific. I certainly know which are city vehicles in terms of the white pickups and the street sweepers and the lawn mowers and so on. And those I'm certainly aware of. Brom Street, I'm not quite sure. I do know that this year, I think it was either June or July, when I was talking to my neighbors, I asked them, what on earth is going on with the number of vehicles going up and down the street? And that's when I became more educated in what the circumstances were. So I certainly don't present myself as being an expert. It's strictly Schneider, and I have to say selfishly that I became even more aware of the vehicles when they were diverted from Dill Street down Schneider Street, because they all went in front of my house rather than going down Dill Street. And when I found that out, I said, well, thank you very much to my neighbors, because the diversion, and it just made the point that there are 3 streets that these vehicles can go up and down. Well, actually 2, Dill and Schneider, and that's it.
And diversion doesn't work.
Diversion doesn't work because they all start at the maintenance place and they all have to go past David and Schneider. So I'm sorry, I really can't answer that question as much because of the impact. And the neighbors, we certainly knew what the purpose of all the large trucks and so on and for the renovations were. Yeah. The other vehicles, it was, why is this so? So I'm not sure that answers your question, Frank.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, but just put it another way. I don't want to push you on this, but before, I believe Bram Street was closed in 2011. Mm-hmm. Before that, going back a number of years, you've lived there a number of years. Is it recently that you've noticed this problem?
I noticed specifically this summer and last summer. Yeah. And that's because, as I say, I work on my porch, and therefore the exposure visually into the noise. I mean, I live in an old brick house and work in the back of it, so I wouldn't have seen or heard of it. But specifically the last 2 years, I was more aware in the summer months, and out of curiosity, that's when I decided to write down what went by and when, because it appeared, and certainly the same vehicles would go by multiple times, whether it's start, break, lunch, mid-afternoon, end of day. It's a repetition of when they go by. So I would say within the last 2 years, the specific reasons behind that, right, I had associated with the reconstruction. Now it sort of came out and says, well, why is it still happening? So the awareness was much greater this year.
Okay, thank you for that. And certainly, as Leslie already said, you completely understand vehicles that maintain the park being in the park.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, certainly if you're asked, should they be stored in the park? Yes. Do you want them going up and down in front of your house? Well, no, but it's at this point, it's the only way in and out of the park. So it's a necessity. It's something that you at this point, you live with if you live in that area. So it's the bigger piece is, why are there vehicles that support other areas of the city being stored there, which adds to the traffic and adds to the noise.
Sure.
And safety issues.
That's
and
all
safety.
The questions I had, Mr. Chair. I've got some for staff.
Yeah, we're going to go questions to staff, and then if you want to bring forward your motion, because we only have really one question from members of council. So, Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a question to staff, and I doubt very much that staff have in mind that they want to purposely annoy Victoria Park residents. And I'm sure you have looked at all options that are available to you guys to address this issue. So to that report that you guys provided, if you look at 4-7, the appendix for the different vehicles, help me out, help me understand. So out of all these vehicles, different type of vehicles, and the residents kind of conceded to that point that they understand that, you know, certain vehicles have to be housed there for maintenance of the park activities. What of these vehicles here are for outer areas that have nothing to do with Victoria Park?
Mr. Hummel?
Through you, Mr. Chair. If you look on 4-7, right down to the part where it starts with downtown horticulture, those pieces of equipment, actually just above that, where it says vehicles starting and ending, the large water truck does not start or does not get housed in Victoria Park, but it does go in and out of Victoria Park to fuel or fill up with water. So the equipment above that is specifically to Victoria Park itself. The downtown horticulture trucks have been in the park for as long as anyone can remember, has helped in the park, and then they deal with the King Street horticulture bed, Queens Boulevard, as I noted in the report. And then the turf mowers and the sanitation are the 4 pieces of equipment that were new to the park since the closing of Brom Street.
Okay, so pretty much everything there, the only new addition equipment is the turf mowers.
And the sanitation sidewalk sweeper.
All right, okay. And one of the points that the residents were trying to pick up on is, can't we just, they're saying, fine, if you don't have to, you know, put at KOF, but is there anywhere in the downtown vicinity that these 2 equipments or a few of the louder noise resonating equipment can be housed elsewhere? Within built capacity, not building a new site.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we looked at those options, and I may not have painted the picture properly. The issue behind the equipment is we could certainly park one of the trackless that Ms. Claire was talking about. We could park it at City Hall parking garage or at one of the parking garages. The issue then would be we're driving it into the park, cleaning it, fueling it, driving it back up. So we're still going to be having that coming in and out of the park. So to find another location, as I said, the biggest problem is because of the efficiencies of the mower, they have to be washed every night.
Right.
So could they be parked somewhere else? They certainly could. But then
Doesn't take away from the going
you're still
back
going to
and
be coming
forth.
in and out of the
Yeah.
park, and you're still going to have that impact. So that kind of was that debate on how do we
So
how
how
do we deal with it?
about for refueling and cleaning? Do we have any other, any other site, operational site within the core?
Through you, Mr. Chair, nothing within the core. We would have to be traveling a distance, whether it's down to
What's the closest?
one of the other satellites from Victoria Park. You know, we're probably traveling down to Bridgeport.
Wow.
There are the Hog Fuel Supply. They have depots around town they could stop at. But again, it's still amount of traveling and distance and what that impact is. So, we try to look at those options, and we in fact looked at those options before bringing the equipment into the park. There's not a real easy answer to say, yes, it would be more efficient or less. I think the problem is there's still distance you got to travel to do one or the other.
And this had to be asked because it's better to point out, and it's helpful for the residents to understand too, that there aren't very glaring options that are easy. It's pretty much one or the other. Either we do operate at the KOF, or obviously, we continue in operating the way we are here. As for timing, operational, anything that can be done within the timing, they address some points that, some vehicles actually go out earlier than 7 o'clock. Can that be easily addressed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I know we discussed this when we met with the residents, our staff starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. We have not been able to find out, and it wouldn't surprise me if the large truck that empties the dumpsters, have they been given a key to access the gate? We have done that in the past in certain locations. I apologize, I didn't check into that key item. It could very well be an issue. Our staff aren't getting into the park until 6:30 at the earliest. And we've run into issues of events at the picnic shelter where all these people are parking that they haven't been able to get into the compound. So,
Right.
I mean, we certainly can address that with the emptying of the dumpster. And I think the question was asked, if, is there an opportunity to even look at staff starting later in the morning? The issue keeps coming back to us that it's the fact that the machines are in the park. Didn't really have to do with the time, whether they're starting at 7 or 8 or 9. It was the
It's a
issue
noise
in
throughout
the
the day.
park. So
Right.
we
Okay.
try to look at those different options, and
Well-
certainly willing to look at if it certainly helps the
Well,
residents.
the delegation was pointing at something, and I wanted to ensure that staff did look at all available options, and I'm glad that you guys did, so thank you.
Councillor Arlington, can you just leave it to questions, and then we'll come back to your motion
Questions, yeah.
afterwards.
Questions for staff. Can you just clarify for me, I see it in the report, but how many extra vehicles were moved to the park after Bram Street closed? I believe it's 4. Am I correct, Greg?
That's correct.
4 vehicles. Can you tell me what kind of vehicles?
On 4-7, near the bottom of the page where it says turf mowers, city routes, 2 trackless, which are typically a yellow. The McLean is a trackless, but it's a red, based on Ms. Claire's description. And the small sidewalk sweeper that does both the trails in the park and does King Street. Those are the 4 new pieces of equipment.
Yeah, I saw that in the report. The reason I ask is because this is somewhat of a moving target there. Sometimes that doesn't match the vehicles that I see in the park storage area. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Can you tell me if, can those 4 vehicles be moved to another location? And you've already mentioned a couple of locations. And I believe what I'm hearing is, yes, it's possible, but it's a bit of a pain.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think anything's possible. It's the issue of, how to do all that. Like, as I said, we could park it at the Duke Street parking garage, use up a space and park it there. But at this point, we'd still be coming into the park to clean it off and fuel it, to drive it back up to the parking garage to park it there. Staff certainly could start there, go out and do their routes, but at the end of the day, they would come back to the park to wash, to fuel, to submit their work orders. Everything's done electronically and sent in, and then they take it back up to the parking garage and park it there.
And would that be in the summer and winter, Greg? That situation you're describing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it could work that way. But again, I think what's happening is you're dealing with more trips in and out of the park.
Okay.
So either way you're looking at, there's going to be an impact.
Do we have any capacity to continue to park them at Bram? Anywhere on Bram? Are these stored indoors or outdoors?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know what the possibilities at Bram. We were asked or have been told that with the parking lot and things changing there, our time on the site was limited. Some of the equipment is parked outdoors. In the winter months, the equipment's parked in the garages. But at this point, we were told that we had to have everything off the site. So.
Right. And you're saying in this report, if I'm reading it correctly, that to create some kind of yard area for these vehicles elsewhere would cost about $40,000.
Through Mr. Chair, that's correct. I mean, to go in and put a gravel surface down, To fence it in, we're looking at just a cheap concrete bunker, similar that we use on our ice rinks, to be able to store fuel, and that water service, which is really the important part for 8 months of the year.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I had some comments to make. Do you want me to make those now or after?
Can you make them when you do your motion?
Sure.
Okay. Councillor Ineski.
Just a handful of questions to staff, and I'm going to start off with Mr. Carmichael. And a lot of residential areas throughout the city, there are signs posted as no truck routes. And yet we have trucks running through a residential area here. Is there any enforcement on that, or is that city does not enforce their own trucks?
Through the chair, in response, I would offer that typically the enforcement of heavy trucks on non-heavy truck routes is most times done through a complaint basis and not proactively. As long as the signing is in place, which I believe it is for Victoria Park, but we can certainly follow up on that. But we would request the police to do so based on a proven concern being raised to us.
But we have concerns raised by the residents here.
Fair enough. And in addition to that, it's important to note that heavy vehicles do have permission to leave a heavy truck route and go on a non-truck route as long as they have a bona fide destination. So based on the current situation of these vehicles being stored at Victoria Park, any police officer enforcing it would not issue a ticket because that's where they store their vehicles. So they have to come and get to and from the location where their vehicles are typically stored. Okay.
And at what stage does a truck become a truck in terms of violation? Is it a pickup truck not considered that? Or one ton pickup truck? Is that, I don't know where the category range starts.
Through the chair, the heavy truck's defined as a loaded or unloaded 4.5 kilograms in weight, 4,500 kilograms in weight. So to give you an idea, it's typically a single unit moving truck would be an equivalency of the tipping point to make a heavy truck. So just single double axle pickup trucks are not heavy trucks. It's typically a little larger than that.
Okay, thank you. I figured the answer would be something similar to that, but I just wanted to be sure. Question to Mr. Hummel. As a possible solution or consideration, there's at the end of Water Street, right by the bend, there's a little shed there by the turnaround of Water Street for maintenance, storage, and stuff of that nature. Is there room to put some vehicles in that area or expand that area in any possible way and still screen it from the residents or from the park? Is there potential there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, is there potential? Yes. That garage, the front garage, is used through the summer months as part of storage and use by special events. We do use it in the winter months for our ice making crews. That's where their equipment comes out of for when they're working their shifts Wednesday to Sunday night. So it is being used at this time. Is there an option to create something larger? I think from our meeting with the neighbors, it was brought up that the concern is move it from one end to somewhere else in the park. They had concerns about that as well.
So in the meantime, you're still just going to leave it there based on your operation needs?
At this point, yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at another solution, potential solution. When I was on site, it caught my eye that when I was in the city yards there, I noticed a number of school buses parked between the fence and the Iron Horse Trail. There's a path in there or a gravel area where the buses were able to turn around and park because there was picnicking happening in the area because you weren't allowed to park in the parking lot as you approached the shed area or the maintenance area. Is there a possibility to take that gravel portion where those school buses were parked, and there was 4 or 5 of them, or whatever the number was, and extend that somehow over the Iron Horse Trail to use part of the trail-link system to get to West Avenue, and use that as an alternative route and market it in such a way?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we certainly looked at that opportunity to extend another road access out to West Ave. In fact, when we originally put the fence compound, we had talked about extending it out the back of the building into what is referred to as the overflow parking lot. And in discussion with special events, the concern was the amount of parking that happens down there in special events time. They didn't want to lose that parking. And that's why we kept it tighter and just around the side and the back of the building that was previously used. So we did review the access to West Ave. And in fact, we talked again with the residents when we met, that we had looked at that. Again, the issue that was brought up is, do we move it from this place in the park to another? You continue just to move the impact to different parts of the park. And it was certainly one of those that they said they really didn't want to do. And again, it's just the sheer cost of running that through. You're just moving the impact. So it would mean another route out of the park. I mean, we certainly could do it, but what's the impact on the neighbors that are right there who haven't had that roadway system in? So it was something we had certainly looked at. It didn't sound like there was an appetite to really go any further with it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you. I just want to follow up further on the questions around the potential relocation of some of these. And you're indicating that somebody has told you that the Brom Street site is no longer usable?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we were given the indication that we were to be off the site and that the buildings that were left on site, that we were slowly moving out of that building for the development of that site.
No, I understand that, but I mean, we're a ways away, I think, from that site being fully developed. And so while that may not be a permanent solution, I'm struggling with understanding why that may not be a solution, at least, for the next few years. Because, I mean, unless somebody knows something I don't anticipate there's going to be,
Mr.
500,000 square feet of
Mr. Walmer, can I
building
address your
going up
question?
there.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Through the chair, Mr. Hummel's quite right that we want to not encourage the use of the Brom Street yards for parks purposes. But I think the key point here is the one that Mr. Hummel raised. If we were to use the City Hall parking garage or Duke Ontario parking garage, these vehicles would still have to go back to Victoria Park to be cleaned and fueled. So if we use Brom Street or another yard, the same thing happens. We can relocate them, but it's not going to reduce the traffic. It's just changing the time of day.
Okay, and I understand the fueling piece. I mean, the cleaning piece potentially could still happen elsewhere, including in the loading dock. I mean, presumably we clean other vehicles in there already. I don't know that for a fact, but that may be a factor. Also, in terms of the Forest Heights, the issues of the tracklesses in particular, is there a reason why those could not potentially be partnered up with our fire station sites as an example? Because I believe all of them have fueling depots there at those stations. Is that an option? Particularly, I'm thinking of Bridgeport and Guelph Street and Forest Heights and the Forest Heights station.
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, we've looked at those sites, and I'll use Forest Heights Community Center as an example. There's not a lot of space there to be able to put a fenced-in compound, to be able to have this equipment. They don't have the room to park it inside. So you start to build that in. Part of the washing component is, it's not just a matter of washing it down a catch basin, because now you have to clean it, the catch basin, out because of the grass clipping. So even from a washing out perspective, it's you wash the material off, staff are gathering it. That's part of the material that gets into the garbage bins down at Victoria Park now. So it's a matter of being able to control the wash off and be able to clean it up afterwards. So we looked at Forest Heights as a specific location, but based on the amount of space at that site, it really didn't allow us an opportunity based on, again, future needs of the community center. So, we kind of ruled that one out again.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a number of comments which I'll save for the comment period. I just have one simple little question. In the report, it talks about the COF provides facility to house first response vehicles indoors. What are first response vehicles? Is that ambulances, or what is that?
Mr. Whitmer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, first response are typically vehicles used for snow clearing, like plows, graders, salters. That was the typical, and that's been the brunt of the majority of the vehicles that are there are the large-sized vehicles that obviously we're not referring to here. We don't have an issue with storing dump trucks or vac trucks typically at the machine shop. Those are all stored at the COF.
These, in the days of Brom Street, these vehicles were not stored inside?
Majority of the vehicles are still stored outside, although a number of our first response vehicles are stored inside at the COF.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand this one. Thank you.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. And I guess my first question is, do we have a sense of the rough traffic count that goes in and out? Have we ever done any kinds of studies? I mean, the delegate, Dominique had done something of a rough count of about 100 passes a day by her home, and I don't know if that's back and forth, but I was wondering if there's any kind of comparable measures that we have.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did try to do a bit of our net through our GPS system. A lot of our parks equipment, the smaller pickup trucks, the small mowers, the gators or trucksters that we use do not have GPS. We did take a look over week-long periods to see, and it will track everything at the city. So there were times the flusher truck were down those streets cleaning catch basins, the street sweepers, again, all bigger, heavier pieces of equipment that would certainly impact the residents. The smaller stuff does not have it, but it was the communication of the number of vehicles that they've indicated that we went down to the park and started to realize that in our collective agreement states that staff have a 10-minute break in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, and a 20-minute paid lunch to be had on site. And based on the numbers, we started to look at some of the park staff were getting into a habit of coming back at break time, coming back at lunch, which is not acceptable. So we had that discussion with them that when you leave, you take your lunch with you, you have your break on. So if you're overworking near the clock tower, that's where you're having your break. Go find a tree to sit under, have your break, have your lunch, get back to work. So it certainly did point out an issue to us that we needed to clamp down on so that we didn't have this constant traffic in and out of that side of the park.
Thank you for having that discussion, and I appreciate the Victoria Park neighborhood for bringing this to our attention as well. And do you have a sense of the number of trips that might have impacted in terms of the discussion that's been had, whether it's reduced it by a percentage that you can put your mind to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know what the percentage would be, but just as an example, the 4 smaller trucks, the trucksters in there, if there's 4 of them that are leaving in 7:15 in the morning, coming back at break, leaving lunch, I mean, that's 8 trips in a day. So that turns into 32 trips in a hurry. So,
right.
That starts to climb up there that, again, it was valuable for us to hear that, to ensure that staff aren't doing that. So did it reduce it by 30 or 40%? I would like to think so. And I know when we met on September 11th, one of the residents did indicate that he certainly saw a difference. And part of it, and we were very honest with him, was A, we think staff have tightened it up, as well as at the timing, our students were gone. So that meant less staff in the park, which again would impact that number of trips.
That's helpful, thank you. You also, Mr. Hummel, talked about hog fuel, and I'm just, based on my experience living in the area, it would seem it's a ballpark about 2 kilometers, maybe a bit more, from Victoria Park to the Lancaster site, under 3 certainly. Do we have access to that? Could we pay to, and would that solve the refueling and washing issue, since that's like a large yard that would be able to cope with that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Hog fuel on Hill Street is actually one of our fuel depots that we have access to, similar to Battler Yard and the Coff. Obviously, we like to use our own at the Coff because we do have a little bit better break on the fuel cost, but it's not appreciable or wouldn't deter us from having somebody pick fuel in there instead of driving all the way back and going back out. So it is available for fuel for the equipment that does need it, but it doesn't deal with the washing issue, and that's the only other problem.
Okay, so I guess that's where we're stuck, is you need the proper drainage and the fenced yard to accommodate, and the turnaround for large trucks. And you're saying the Coff is really the only, or sorry, Victoria Park and the Coff are the only 2 sites. Sorry?
And Battler Yards.
And Battler Yards? How far is Battler Yards?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's on Strasbourg Road. The corner of Strasbourg and Battler is the other fuel depot. We've got 3 locations where staff can get fuel.
But no, does that have wash facilities as well?
It is not.
Okay, that's what I'm after. Yeah. So the only 2 wash facilities are Victoria Park and the Coff?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councillor Arlington, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, some general comments, and I mean this in all due respect. I think this is a comprehensive report from staff, but I'm also disappointed that it suggests no solution other than the status quo. I think the content of the report gives numerous reasons for the increase of city vehicles driving through the park, but suggests quite strongly that nothing can be done about this, and I disagree with that. Sorry. I was saying the content of the report gives numerous reasons for the increase in city vehicles driving through the park, but suggests that nothing can be done to address that issue. I've been at these meetings, and it always strikes me at these neighborhood meetings and the neighborhood concerns that people don't enjoy wasting their time attending these meetings. It's very difficult sometimes for them to attend the meetings. And I think in the park and elsewhere, we owe these residents and the neighborhood association, in this case, some form of solution to the problem that they're legitimately complaining about. I don't think we should, and again, I mean this in all due respect, I don't think we should just say to them, well, suck it up, and that's the issue, and we're not going to do anything. They pay taxes, and they are the eyes and ears in that park. They watch everything. They keep an eye on the park. Even just for that purpose, we owe them something. Residents certainly appreciate the efforts that have just been outlined, where we told parks workers not to keep going back for their coffee breaks or lunch breaks. But I don't believe that lasts for very long. It fades away and then we're back to square one. And it does not work to bounce the traffic from Dill Street to Schneider, because then you just got a concentration of traffic on one or the other streets. I don't think residents in general, from the people that I've talked to, I don't think they were even aware of this problem before something changed in the park. And what helped change that was the closure of Bram. But also what has helped is there's barely a weekend goes by where there isn't some major festival in the park. And I can certainly understand that we have to service those kind of events. But still, I don't think residents should have to put up with that. I think we can find solutions if we put our minds to it. And yeah, it'll be a little inconvenient, but I think that's worthwhile to keep that particular group. Obviously, they're in my ward, but any particular group a little happier than where they are at the moment. So I have a motion to suggest, Mr. Chair, and I'd welcome any kind of meaningful additions to that motion. Do you want to hear the motion now, or do you want to take other comments?
No, I'll take your motion now.
The motion is still pretty general. I would suggest that staff return to council next Monday with a recommendation to relocate and reduce the total number of city vehicles housed at Victoria Park in order to reduce traffic and vehicle noise experienced by surrounding residents on Schneider, Dill, and David. As I say, I'd welcome any amendments to that. Any friendly amendments?
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola, if you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, I will, yes. I want to thank the people from that neighborhood for coming forward with their concerns, because I sure have learned a lot in the last few weeks relating to this issue. For many years, we talked about a new maintenance facility, which started out being called the Central Maintenance Facility, which is going to be located in the geographic center of the city. And when that didn't pan out we didn't seem to want to go there, we moved it and came up with the name Consolidated Maintenance Facility. And to me, I thought consolidated was we were putting everything together. I thought all of these satellite areas were going to disappear. I had no idea we had all these satellite areas around. I was surprised. I was not aware of how active the machine shop at Victoria Park is. I thought, I knew there was something there, but I thought with the consolidated facility that was going to disappear. That hasn't happened. We're hearing a lot of discussion now on travel time and all of these issues which we needed to be dealing with back half a dozen years ago when we were coming up with a $70-80 million consolidated maintenance facility. So having said all that, I will support. I think it's a good recommendation coming from Councillor Etherington. I think we need to look and come up with some reasonable perspectives to change what's going on. I mean, we owe that to any residential neighborhood, regardless of where it is. It's probably more important in the park, in that there is so much activity there, a good activity, and that's great. So almost to somewhat compensate for that, we need to get some of the traffic off of there. So staff need to come back with some solid solutions. You know, we sit here all afternoon in council throwing out this and that. And we ask the residents for their solutions. You know, we're going to end up here making a camel out of a horse or something. I mean, that's something staff should be able to come back with a good report with some ideas. And yes, unfortunately, maybe it's going to cost us some money. We crossed that bridge when we built consolidated facility where it is located now. So I think look forward to having staff come back with some solid information, and hopefully, it's only a week, but hopefully the community, the residents that are most affected will get an opportunity to review whatever the staff are going to say within and have enough time to come and present some solid discussion concerning the recommendation. So bottom line, I will support the recommendation before us. Thank you.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much, and I too will support this motion. I wasn't sure where Councillor Etherington was going, but I agree with keeping this generic. I would make a suggestion for a friendly amendment, though, that consideration be given to restoring the traffic to pre-2011 levels. The reason I'm suggesting that is that the residents have never said they want no traffic there. I'm still not sure of the numbers here, if they pertain to all traffic moving from Victoria Park or just the pre-2011 levels. But I think there's certainly an understanding that just like when you move into a place near an airport, that there was some traffic and noise when they moved into the neighborhood. There was an understanding that they would be living in a popular area, and they were willing to tolerate that. What changed was the Bram Yards closure. And they thought it was temporary, and they didn't even complain until recently when they realized it was more sustainable and permanent. So I agree with Councillor Gazzola's comments that even if it costs us money, we have to get this right. If we were living in that area, we would feel the exact same way, and that's very much a litmus test for me. So I would support some kind of measure that reduces the traffic as approximate as possible to the pre-2011 changes.
Councillor Neske.
This is rather an unfortunate scenario that's unfolded with the residents. I mean, staff are trying to do their particular job in that particular area. I've been doing it for years. It's just a matter of bringing some equipment in, and it's been unfortunate that the in and out point happens to be centrally located at David and Schneider Street, because there's just no other way of getting in and out. And I can understand the suggestions of maybe storing some equipment at the City Hall, but still you got to bring it back, as pointed out by staff, to get it either cleaned or fueled up. And the passing by is that particular intersection and into the residential area is still going to continue on. So in my opinion, that's not even a solution. I want to go back to what I had mentioned about looking at a potential access from the back along the gravel portion beside the Iron Horse Trail and out towards West Avenue. And I would be prepared to support Councillor Etherington's motion if he takes a friendly amendment to accept that also be explored as part of the solution option.
Is that a friendly?
Yeah, I think that is friendly, and Councillor Dan Glenn Graham's amendment would be friendly as well. I'm perfectly willing to look at all possible solutions. I'm unaware, though, Councillor Yanetsky, if we have land that we own through to West Avenue, other than the trail.
I can't quite hear you, you're fading.
Do we own land through to West Avenue other than the Iron Horse Trail?
Well, there's the trailing system that goes through there. I'm just wondering whether that could be incorporated. That's something that needs to be explored. I don't know how wide it is, how big, whether it's feasible.
You mean have traffic going through on the trail to West Avenue?
As an option. I mean, it may not be the best option, but at least it's an option to look at. That's all I'm saying.
I don't think that is a friendly amendment. Okay. I don't think it's safe to have traffic going through on the trail. Okay. But certainly Councillor Dan Glenn Graham's wording, that would be friendly. Just while I've got the floor, I would ask that the word house be changed from stored and maintained.
Okay, go ahead.
In that motion.
Go ahead, Councillor Yanetsky.
Well, basically, I was hoping that to get a support on that, but I would like to make an amendment to that, if I don't have a friendly amendment, to have that explored. And those are my comments.
Okay. We'll come back to that amendment. Mr. Wilmer, can you please speak? Sorry, I get you and Mr. Whitmer confused. I'm like, when I look on here, it's...
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you. May I make a suggestion regarding timing? Because it seems to me that if this motion carries, staff will come back with a report outlining alternatives and costs, and there will be costs. It's entirely foreseeable then that the outcome of that will be to refer this matter to the 2014 budget, because there will be budget implications you should not make in isolation of your other budget deliberations. And operating budget day is not far away. It's December the 12th. And so I don't know that it's necessary that staff put a report together for next Monday. They would have less than 2 full working days to do that. But that if it's going to be an issue paper for the 2014 operating budget, that would give a bit more time to prepare a thorough report. And as I say, I think it's something that Council should consider the budget implications in conjunction with your other budget deliberations.
Councillor Etherington. Care to amend your motion?
Yeah, perhaps Mr. Wilmer, with an L, could give me some guidance on that. How would you change that, Mr. Wilmer? Just the date?
Through the chair, rather than to say that the staff come back October 28th, they say staff come back with a report as part of the 2014 and this might be capital and operating, but as part of the 2014 budget with issue papers for Council's consideration.
Yeah, I could live with that. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Mayor Zaire?
Thank you very much. I'm reminded of a phrase that someone gave at the Leadership Waterloo Region workshop. An issue can be complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated in order to resolve it. And I think this is the kind of situation here. We are getting into the weeds here and trying to, by committee, solve the problem. There are issues that need to be addressed. There is no question about that. I will support the recommendation as it now is, on the understanding that it's information gathering. And the reason I'm saying that is that the friendly amendment that Councillor Glenn Graham brought forward referred to going back to pre-2011 levels. That we could very easily get into an argument, well, what was the 2011, and so on. So it's coming back as information. You cannot be precise, because I don't want us to get hung up on exactly that wording, because we don't know what it was exactly, and there will always be differences of opinion on it. I could not support the amendment that Councillor Yanetsky intends to bring forward in terms of taking equipment over the trails. We already had sort of dismissed that about going down the Walter Bean Trail in an earlier discussion on this. So that is really mixing apples and oranges in terms of the equipment, pedestrians, and vehicles. That's a no-go in my books. But it is, we will always, there are some who will always disagree with what was said a number of years ago when we were working on the centralized maintenance facility or consolidated maintenance facility. And it doesn't matter anymore. We have what we have. And so there's no point in going back and debating all of that issue. We just need to deal with the problem that exists today, period. It's not complicated.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, whenever you have a huge operational change in model like what we did, and speaking to Councillor Zaire's comments of, you know, centralizing our operations facility, you're going to have problems. You're going to have issues that arise and that you don't foresee, you know, ahead of time. But it's not that we have to, you know, it's a matter of tweaking. And it's understandable that maintenance vehicles to Victoria Park is not new. they had been housed there prior to any change or relocation to the KOF. It's issues that are arising with some new vehicles that are for the outside Victoria Park area that resonate more sound. I would support Councillor Etherington's motion for staff, and it is in capable hands. Staff is the one who should be looking at this and prioritizing, assessing what's the best way forward, and of course the costs necessary for that, rather than us quarterbacking this last minute. But any information that will come part of that motion, I would ask staff to also show what the cost would be if we just had those 2 or 3 or 4 vehicles that Mr. Hummel outlined that are not for Victoria Park, if only they were housed at the KOF. Because the number in the report, to my understanding, and you can shake your head if I'm wrong, is to do with if all the vehicles were taken out and housed at the KOF. No? Okay. All right. Well, then never mind. All right. That's all.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks. I too will be supporting the motion that's before us. I think we need to try to address some of the concerns that the residents have raised. I would, obviously hope that through the investments we've made in the park, we've built some goodwill with the neighborhood as well, and in terms of understanding that there are some maintenance issues that are associated around the park. But at the same time, I think it's reasonable to strive to move to an environment as it existed back a few years ago. I think the one point that needs to be made in addition to that is that when we dealt with the whole CMF issue, it was never said by staff that it would mean that there would be no city vehicle anywhere else in the city. And so I think it's important to understand that there are locations where we do have vehicles, and that was always contemplated to be the case, but it was really a consolidation of our Parks Operations site, our Brom Street site, into this new facility.
Okay. I will support the motion forward by Councillor Urbanovich. Etherington. I think that this is the proper approach to looking at the issue, because it needs to be based on all of the other competing issues within the city. Because I know for myself, I have some other concerns within my ward and other wards about tree canopy and all that stuff. So I think it needs to be in the queue along with those other issues. So with that, we will put up a vote. All those in... Oh, yeah, okay, sorry, that's right. All those in favor of Councillor Yaneski's amendment? Record vote. They're open. And that has failed. Next vote up is Councillor Etherington's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. I lost my screen, so I'll just... But
what we did now.
Okay, next item up on the agenda is the Margaret Avenue Bridge Replacement Project Timelines. Ms. Robinson? You have the floor.
Just going to ask you to get the podium lowered, please. Thanks. Okay.
You may proceed.
Oh, sorry. I have some excellent news for you this afternoon. The Margaret Avenue Bridge is coming down. I'm going to update you on 4 things: demolition of the existing bridge, a pre-design and design of the new bridge, construction of the new bridge, and pedestrian and cyclist movements in the area. So firstly, demolition of the existing bridge. A contract was awarded to Bel Air Excavating for $347,000 and $95,000 to replace the gas main that has to be removed from the bridge. The contractor is mobilizing on site today. He was there this morning. He's putting up his construction fencing. He started to float his equipment on site, so he has started. Railway permissions and permits appear to be in place. The contractor is still talking to the railways about final items, which is normal in construction, so that's all in hand. And just the timing of what the demolition is going to look like, the center span will come down first. The center span is where the risk is because it's sitting on those corbel ledges which are at risk of failure. So that center span will come down first. Then the rest of the bridge will come down. The abutments which are at the side of the bridge will stay there because they hold up the dirt. And the 2 piers, which are the round columns holding up the bridge, they're going to be cut off about 1 meter above grade. Once all of that is down, the piers, the base of the piers, will be used to construct some kind of metal tower to put the gas main back in place temporarily until we get the new bridge up. So that's demolition of the existing bridge. Pre-design and design of the new bridge. This work will be planned as a Schedule A+EA. The work will likely commence at the end of November, so we're in the process of procuring a consultant to do the pre-design and the design. And the design will take 4 to 6 months. We have now fully identified funding to pay the cost for this bridge, and that funding will be recommended for approval during the budget process. We're still working with Class C estimates, which, as you know, are plus or minus 50%, and as we move forward in the project, we'll get more refined estimates, and those numbers will come down. Construction is currently estimated to take between 8 and 12 months. And the reason we can't be more specific about that is one of the things we do in pre-design is we look at the different alternatives for the kind of bridge that we're going to put back. And we need to do a survey in soils, as you know. One of the things I know we need to address is the clearance for the rails currently is substandard at the Margaret Avenue Bridge. So when we put a new bridge back, we need to increase that clearance. So that means either we'll be increasing the approaches to the bridge or we'll have to select a bridge that is not as tall. So all of those things need to be worked out in pre-design, and they all will impact the time it takes to put up the new bridge. Obviously, we're well aware that council is very anxious to get a new bridge in place, so we will take that under advisement as we're looking at the alternatives in pre-design. And estimated construction completion is winter, spring 2015. Again, I can't be more specific at this point until we do a pre-design and have a better idea of what kind of bridge we're putting up. That's the best information we have today. So pedestrian and cycling access, the Cycling Advisory Committee were consulted, and they've advised on the best cycling routes, cycling detour routes, and those are along Wellington, either to Lancaster or to Duke. So those have been signed and will be in place for the duration. Currently, pedestrians are being routed to St. Ledger, and we're aware that the pavement on St. Ledger is in poor quality, and there are not proper sidewalks across the tracks. So this fall, following the demolition, we will be doing work on that pavement and installing new sidewalks, and that work can be completed under our existing roads program. We need to do that after the demolition of the bridge because St. Ledger is the construction route for the bridge equipment, and also we anticipate the pavement might take a bit of a beating from that construction equipment, so it's best to let that happen first and then do those improvements to the roadway. And finally, pedestrians, as you know, have been using the bridge. We asked them not to, but we're well aware they had been using the bridge. As of today, that bridge is a construction site. Pedestrians will absolutely not be allowed on the bridge. It won't be safe for people to be on the bridge, so they need to stay off it. So if we're going to see how things go over the next few days, but if people continue to use the bridge, we will have to come up with some kind of enforcement that beyond what the contractor is able to do. And I can tell you that the region social services were out at the bridge this morning making sure that homeless people were not still under the bridge, and I believe someone was relocated this morning.
Okay. We have a few questions for you, Mrs. Robinson. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago I sent you a few questions and you responded to me, and I don't know if you sent those answers out to the rest of council. I didn't get a chance after that. I was a bit under the weather and didn't get these things out. So I just want to go through the questions again. And my first concern is when the bridge is being dismantled, will we find out any additional information as to the weakness in the structure resulting in the bridge to be torn down?
Certainly. So I'll paraphrase what I responded to in the email, and I'm afraid I didn't circulate that to the wider council audience. In order to do a fulsome examination of the Corbel Ledge, which is at risk of failure, in order to do an elaborate examination, we'd have to completely rethink how we're taking down that bridge to preserve that Corbel Ledge, to do that testing. And we didn't feel that we were able to do that with the scheduling constraints we were under. That being said, as the bridge is being dismantled, I can assure you that all kinds of engineers, ours and the consulting engineers and all kinds of other people will be out there and taking an active interest in what's going on with the bridge. We may at times ask the contractor to pause in his work so that we can get a piece of the bridge or look at something, and we will save those pieces for potential future examination, but we did not feel that we had the scheduling ability to delay the project in order to take large pieces off without destroying the actual portion that's at risk.
Was council given an opportunity to discuss the option as to what it would have cost to have a closer look at the bridge and dismantling it?
I didn't bring that forward to council, no.
Why not?
I don't recall being instructed by council to do so.
Shouldn't you, as a professional engineer, put all the alternatives on the table? Do you have any idea of what the additional cost might be to have an opportunity to have a better look at the structure?
We did run those costs and asked Steve to speak to that. We didn't?
Go ahead, Mr. Allen.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Robinson is correct. We would have to rethink the whole dismantling process for preserving sections. The cost really would have been in a lot of time to do that, as well as costs for that particular dismantling. So I would guess that it would probably double the schedule time, if not more, and I'm not even sure that we have a way to test those pieces.
I appreciate your answer, but you're saying there's a lot of guessing going on, and it'd be nice to have had an opportunity to consider that, okay? And I think it is important. Now, in your response to me, you said, well, we don't have any other structures like that in Kitchener, so that's it. But there are other structures across this country like that, and I thought perhaps we don't owe it to them, but I thought while we were going through this, I remember raising the question earlier too. I wasn't here when it was discussed the last time, but I remember raising the question earlier because I've always been concerned as to the decision that we've made without really having seen a lot of reasons for the tear down. But I'm hopeful that as we go forward, as they are dismantling the bridge, that we do try to find as much as possible as to what caused the problem and what can be done for it in other cases and other bridges. The other question, and I asked, and I had wondered if council had approved the construction of a new bridge, and I gather the answer is no, we haven't at this point. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as indicated, we've identified the $6 million in funds through the 2014 budget process. Obviously, council votes on those funds and where they come from, and that will happen during the budget process. So staff's job is to identify sources of funding, and it's up to council to vote on that.
Yeah, so that hasn't been done. Council hasn't approved it.
Correct.
The other thing that alarmed me is that we're advised that this is a Class C budget. So, which means the final costs could be edging towards $10 million or $2 or $3 million. And chances are better that they go towards 9 or 10 million. Is that correct?
Sorry, what's the question? Is it a Class C estimate? Yes.
The question is basically that we can determine that when it comes to budget. That's why it's coming towards budget. If it goes off kilter, then we have the option to go forward or not move forward with the project.
Yeah, I guess the point I was driving at is council needs to know these things before they make a quick decision on these things. Are we talking about a $6 million project or a $9 million project? And if we are, maybe we would look at things a little differently. I mean, the other question I have still is, do we have any idea of what capital projects now, because of this, are going to be canceled or postponed? Shouldn't we know that? Shouldn't we have some idea about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll speak to the budget question first. The only way in engineering to get to a pre-tender estimate is to go through the process of engineering a project. So a Class C estimate is where we always start because we don't have enough information. As we gather soils and survey information, and I'm sure you can understand in this situation, survey is very important because it's going to set the grades for what we have to do with the clearance for the new bridge. That's going to help us define the parameters of the new bridge that's going to go up. We cannot come up with a Class B estimate when we're at a Class C level of information. That's how engineering works. And I'm very careful to specify Class C so council understands it's based on the information we have today, which is not complete. That's how engineering works.
Well, and that's how most industry works anyways.
Sure.
So, and the second
Well, I still go back to the question of, do we have some indication of what projects staff are looking at to postpone?
I think that's going to be addressed during the budget, Councillor.
Well, we need to address it now. We're going to start dealing with a 9 or 10 million. That we should know what staff are looking at. No? Yeah.
Well, I think that's why it's going to be coming towards budget, because those are the options that are going to be placed forward. So
All right.
if you have any other questions, Councillor.
Yes, I have a final question. Are there any other alternatives here? Are other alternatives going to be placed before council? Was there an alternative for a repair? Was there an estimate for a repair job? Was that put forward? Did I miss all that?
Certainly. So when we brought a report to council, there were two alternatives presented. One was a short-term repair. It had a design life of maximum of 2 years, and it was $400,000. And the alternative, which we proposed, which was to replace the bridge. Two other alternatives in this case have been considered and discarded. One is a level crossing at Margaret Avenue. The grade, if you think about it, My King is much higher than the rails, so in order to have a level crossing, you'd have to have an 11% grade either side down to the rails. and that is completely unacceptable from an engineering point of view down to a railway. The second alternative would be to not replace the bridge at all. Both our traffic transportation planning folks and the region transportation planning folks have advised unequivocally that this is a major arterial road. It needs to stay in place. Bus routes, it's part of the cycling master plan. So we cannot not replace the bridge.
Okay. Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. So I'll pick up where Councillor Gazzola left off, and perhaps we could just talk a little bit about the level crossing. I understand the 11% grade you're talking about. Is it possible to go back further by leveling out the road further back towards Victoria and the other side? That would add cost, but has consideration been given to that, and what would an acceptable slope be in your mind?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, we could go further back and build very substantial retaining walls either side. I don't know what an acceptable road grade would be coming up to a rail, 2%, 3%. I'm sorry, I'm not a road designer, so I can't say off the top of my head. Yes, that could be considered if it was the will of council for us to consider that. I believe we'd need an engineer to do a pre-design on that alternative.
I know that this is not even a Class C, but could we learn, it doesn't have to be immediate next week, but could we learn at a subsequent committee meeting what it would cost to push back and what an acceptable grade level would be? That would be helpful to know.
Certainly.
In terms of the gas alignment, do we know where it's going to be permanently at this point?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the gas utility will finalize that. As far as I know, we'll replace it within the Margaret Avenue Bridge, likely in a sleeve, same as it is now. But I'll leave that up to them. I imagine they're doing modeling now to see whether that is the best location in the long term.
That makes sense. Thank you. In terms of the public consultation, you certainly have heard from council we want to keep this process as attenuated as possible, and I think you spoke to that in your report. Do you have a methodology in place that will try and compress this in terms of timelines? Do you have some kind of, is that your thinking, that you will have it open and close? Because I don't think that
the timeline's in the report.
No, I understand that. No, what I'm speaking to is that I guess the concern is that there's probably not going to be a lot that the public can say that will change it from an engineering point of view. So do you still feel that public consultation is required, is the first question, and is there a way to do it more quickly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a Schedule A+ Class EA doesn't add any time to the schedule. That is the required schedule per the EA document, so we're perfectly within our rights to plan it as a Schedule A+. And A+ just means we put an advertisement in the paper.
Okay.
Let's be clear, an EA involves looking at the impact, the environmental impact of a range of alternatives. In this case, if we're replacing the bridge, essentially those are all going to be the same. So, and the public don't typically comment on a variety of bridge pre-designs. That's not public. Those are engineering decisions typically and not undertaken by the public. So the A+ EA will not add any time to the schedule, and we're quite comfortable that we can move forward very quickly with that A+ EA.
Great. In terms of the fencing around there, is it more substantial to keep people off the bridge? Do you know if the construction fencing by the contractor is going to be more than what we have?
Do you want to speak to that, Chris? Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this fencing that is being put up this afternoon is the 6-foot high. It's called fast fence in the industry. It all locks together. It's going to be tied to the side of the bridge, so it's fairly substantial. It'll be down during the day when the contractor's on site, obviously to allow material and equipment to come and go, but it's a fairly substantial and significant fence.
That's great. So that people would have to scale it after hours, or they'd have to run the gauntlet with construction people on site. Your concern was that it shouldn't be up to the contractor to enforce that. Were you suggesting that there should be some consideration for some people to supervise that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this point, we'd like to start the project and see what sort of compliance there is. I've been very clear in the media that people now need to stay off that bridge. It's a construction site, and as we start taking it down, it'll be a dangerous construction site. So I think without incurring any additional costs, we can proceed the way we've got it scheduled out, and if if pedestrians aren't cooperative, then we'll need to take another step. We don't have a bylaw in place to keep people off the bridge, but potentially police presence if it came to that. So.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I would support that we do learn from the tear down as much as possible without incurring any additional costs. Councillor Gazola's point is well taken, but we don't. I mean, every dollar is valuable in this project as well as the timeline. So thank you for the report.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report, Mr. Robinson. I see in the report that you've indicated the time frames that could exist for the project. So in that context, I guess depending on what kind of construction we're using, we may end up in the short frame or the shorter time frame versus the longer. So I guess I'm thinking of the kind of construction that the province has used where they've dropped in a bridge or dropped in the beams. That would take us to the shorter time frame, I gather, and other solutions would take us to the longer one?
Through you, Mr. Chair, potentially, yes. A pre-design is going to have to look at all the parameters and the slopes and all that before we can determine what types of bridges would suit the application.
But there's nothing else that we could be doing to make this process happen even faster? That's the question. I mean, I get that these other things, that if there are other options, they may cost more money. They should be on the table, and we'll deal with that. I'm not saying I want to go there, but I think we just need to be clear on what's being said here.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. When we tender the process, we will be considering winter work, and I believe it was in the report, winter work can cost up to 25% extra. That's a decision council will have to make at that time, which we're not there today. We have considered, so a couple of things we need for pre-design are soils information and survey information. Soils information we can probably procure now. Survey information, in the past we have experienced that if the city retains a surveyor and has a survey done, if there's any problem with the data, it becomes the city's risk, and we pass it on to a consulting engineer. So in our experience, it's better to have the consulting engineer doing the design pull the survey themselves. They also know specifically what they're looking for in terms of what information they want to pick up on site. So we're not keen on starting that survey ahead of the procurement of the consultant contract.
So to be clear then, we've done everything that we reasonably can to shorten the time period as much as possible.
I believe we've done everything we reasonably can at this time, yes. Okay,
that was the answer I was hoping to hear, so that's good news. The other piece then, I know there's been some requests to start looking at the dismantling of the bridge and some of these other things. Is it fair to say that that's going to occupy a chunk of staff's time and potentially consultants' time that could be better used focusing on getting the job done and making the bridge happen as quickly as possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess what staff had in mind was we will, within the confines of the project as it's laid out now, we will gather as much information as we can and take pieces down and set them aside and occasionally stop the contractor, and we can do that within the scope that's there now. In order to do a more elaborate testing operation and take large pieces down and preserve them, that would increase the schedule potentially by 2, and as you know, we're not keen on that. And also would increase costs both for getting the testing done and for supervision on site. So we haven't gone to that level of testing or because of the concerns with dollars and the schedule.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mayor Zaire.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions, and I do have some comments. The center span removal will be, I know you've talked to me, but I wasn't sure about it was in the report, and I'm just realizing that now. Just the center span of the demolition will be removed by when?
It's scheduled to be removed by October 31st.
Right. Okay? And the question has been raised about a level crossing, and I have some comments about that, which I'll hold on to, but would you believe if we were to consider that, would that potentially involve property acquisition, considering the need for retaining walls and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. So I just have some comments, but there may be more questions.
There's no comments, so you can go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I think that to consider a level crossing is very retrogressive, or would be very retrogressive. It's a reduction in the safety issue here with a level crossing from a bridge when anything new is happening with rail. A grade separation is the preferred method, and in some cases absolutely essential. With the kinds of things that have been happening with trains in recent times, one would think, and with the likely potential of increased rail traffic on that line. You wouldn't believe it today, but I think, within a short number of years, that will occur. I think that would be a foolish and short-term solution. Sorry, I'm just trying to read my writing now. Oh yeah, in terms of the fence, so that's my reason for asking about when the center span comes down. Clearly, at that point in time, the fence, still for a construction site, but it becomes a moot point because no one can cross the tracks at that point, unless they're going to climb a wall as well as the fence. In terms of the trying to find out the analysis of what may have been the cause, I think only adds cost and is of no value to us at this point in time. First of all, that type of bridge isn't being constructed anymore. And so we find out that, yep, it could have come down sometime, not sure what we've gained, or even saying, not so sure it would have come down. Not one person, I believe, I would hope, around this horseshoe would not have changed their mind about it's got to come down, because the risk was simply too great. We have to keep that in mind. This was a risk issue and a public safety issue. So there's no motion attached here, but I think that the staff have pulled this together as quickly as possible. I would encourage them to continue, and we will deal with the budget implications when the budget comes forward.
Yeah, I think staff's done a great job with under the circumstances, and yes, we can expedite this process, but I think at the same time we have to be careful and take our time and do our due diligence before we go through any other steps, and I appreciate that, and thank you. And that concludes our Community Infrastructures Service Committee, and Councillor Singh has a question. You wanted a question to address committee, and then after that we'll have a 2-minute or 1 minute or 2 minute switch over for special counsel.
Take advantage of that. It's to do with the regional report that's coming to Regional Council for Transportation Environment Services. It's to do with the 2012 collision report. And I know you're at a disadvantage, you're not looking at the report, Mr. Carmichael, but in the report it outlines that Ottawa and Homer-Watson intersection, and that I think disconnects my ward and Councillor Gazzola's ward as well, had one of the highest number of collisions in the region, almost double than what was expected. Expected was 103, and actual was 209. So quite staggering numbers. So just wanted to know if staff could connect with regional staff as well, just to find out as to how they would be addressing that and what type of mitigating measures they would be considering that as well.
In response to that, through the chair, I personally sat on the project team for that project with the region, and all the approvals are in place for roundabouts at Homer-Watson, Ottawa, and Ottawa Alpine Road. through the project. Extensive discussions were held with the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario due to the close proximity to Highway 78 and the expressway. So the negotiations with the ministry have taken place to agreed upon designs for these. Every other group has been involved as far as putting trails and pedestrian facilities through the area. So it's...
How far along is that then?
My understanding is that the roundabouts have been approved through Regional Council.
Okay, all right. And because you do sit on the committee, I would hope that you can add and pass on comments that if there is, obviously, if there already is an approval for the roundabout, that they address and mitigate any future, I guess, issues that do arise with it, and learn from what, I guess, the region and the city had to go through for Block Line and Homer Watson. Okay, thank you.
Duly noted.
We'll do a switch.